Good morning. Many of you keep asking to me and Pontius recipes using the so famous and coveted pio starch. Well, welcome to my specifically designated kitchen to teach you how to cook it in the most Italian way. Today we are doing a pio starch pizza. So, take out your notebooks and we can start cooking. Are you ready to learn? I can't hear you, for those that answered. This is a YouTube video. I'm not there physically, so I will assume you said yes. So, take out your canned pio starch, warm slightly in water if possible, and then open the can. What is this sound?
Hey Pio, change of program. Today we are not teaching the viewers to cook. Today we are covering another 40k war.
But like this I will never get my cooking show on the NBC.
To the hell with the cooking show. We are here to learn 40k lore. Some willingly, you against your will.
And what is the war this time?
It's the legendary war for Hydra Cordatus. And no, the name Hydra doesn't mean there is Alpha Legion shenanigans going around. Thank the Lord for that. Chaos was the law of nature. Order was the dream of man.
Going like this I will never teach people how to make pio soufflé.
I think people can survive without that knowledge, to be honest.
Said the 40k lore YouTuber, spending weeks of his life at a time obsessing about fantasy wars that never happened.
I like to look at the positive side.
Which is?
It could be worse. I could be making My Little Pony lore videos.
That is a reality I don't even want to think about. It's too horrific.
You would be pink in color if we did that.
Your mind is full of horrors I don't want to acknowledge.
Now, today we have one unusual announcement to make, but before that, at this point, you know it! We want to thank all of our followers, members and patrons for all their support and help. And you can become a supporter too either on Patreon, Subscribestar or Ko-Fi, and enjoy exclusive perks and even exclusive access to the full series of Lore Destroyers. Remember to also follow us on Twitch where we stream 3 times a week, so we hope to see you in chat to enjoy our rage when the 40k games we play don't work correctly. Io sto rimanendo sicuro esecuzione dopo esecuzione! Dreadnought! You have the giant thing! Go fight it! Where the fuck are you going?
Il Dreadnought mi ha letteralmente passato davanti!
Ma vaffanculo, pezzo di merda! Valtus, ti odio adesso! Eri figo una volta! Ora vattene a caccare, Valtus!
Ma non sta facendo un cazzo!
Sta combattendo i Marines! Con la Vortex Pistol là! But today there is a special announcement that Pio himself will make.
Hey, you! Have you heard the latest news? No? Because nobody told you or because you are deaf? Genuine question, I can't sign language. But anyway, we have opened our own merch shop. Do you want to become a PO? We got you covered. Do you want to let everyone know your opinion about taxation? We got you covered for that as well. Do you want to help the Interpol catch the legendary masked bandit? We have a shirt that can help you do that. His identity is unknown. Spread the awareness. But especially, do you want your friends to ask you stupid questions like, what in the fuck is a PO? Then check out our shop for numerous funny designs inspired by gags of the channel or memes made in the Discord. I can guarantee you that you will spend more time explaining to people the legend of Pio than the time we already spent explaining you 40k lore. Link in the description. Don't forget to send us a picture if you buy anything. It might end up in a video.
So yeah, we opened a merch shop. It will be updated with more designs over time, but check it out, there is cool stuff. But now, enough with the advertising, or in this case, P-overtising. We have a war to cover. Let's get into the events of the second war for Hydra Cordatus. Yes, you heard me right. The one covered in this video is the second war for Hydra Cordatus, not the first, because the first one was 10,000 years prior, during the Horus Heresy. And we are not covering that until we start a series covering the entirety of the Horus Heresy, which gladly won't happen soon.
There is a bet going. When the Patreon reaches 10,000 euros a month, we will start the Horus Heresy as a series, and continue it as long as that goal is maintained.
As I always said it, I will go crazy to make that series, but at least I will be crazy and rich. Anyway, the events start from inside the Citadel of Hydra Cordatus. Now, to give a little context, Hydra Cordatus as a planet is a wasteland of dust and rock, scoured clean of all life during the Horus Heresy when the Iron Warriors fought here during the First War. But it has been repurposed as a special and heavily defended Mechanicus outpost for an unknown reason that we will find out later as we continue the story. Now, there are some key locations that you have to keep in mind, that you can see in this map. We have the Jericho Falls Spaceport, then we have the first bastion of defense once you leave the Spaceport, which is Tor Christo, And last but not least, we have the Citadel, an heavily defended fortress containing thousands of soldiers, Mechanicus adepts, and especially even a demi-legion of titans. If you think this is a bit too much for a remote outpost on a desert planet, glad your cerebral functions are superior to the ones of a Pio. As yes, it is weird for a simple outpost to have all of these defenses, but once again, it is a thing to explain later. As I said, the story starts inside the Citadel of Hydra Cordatus itself. We see somebody enter the Astropath's chamber of the Citadel, pretty much what in 40k is considered the central communication node of an entire planet. Somebody, dressed in the robes of the Adeptus Mechanicus, enters the chamber, and moves silently between the servitors and the Astropaths. After observing the situation for a while, it disconnects one of the machines feeding the entombed Astropaths in the chamber with nutrients. Poured inside the tube the content of a vial, and then reconnects it to the machine. And as he moved to the door of the chamber, he looked back as the servitors stopped relaying the Astropath's messages. The communication node of Hydra Cordatus was now compromised, and unable to receive external communications, but more importantly, send out any kind of message to the wider Imperium. And this was only the beginning of the nightmare that was about to unfold. Moving to outside of the Citadel instead, the story finally starts in one of the surveyor stations built in a circle around the Jericho Falls Spaceport. Guardsman Hawk, that you need to keep in mind as he becomes important later, is waiting for his two other companions guarding the station to return from a patrol they had to undertake when the scanners of the station had picked up something. For a brief second, to then return back to showing nothing. Even here he comments that nobody would attack the desolate rock that is Hydra Cordatus, that nobody had any reason to invade as there was literally nothing but the Citadel and a few bastions. And while he's right on paper at the moment, that is not what was happening. In fact, something was moving outside of the bunker, and had been for quite some time.
The hunter who was about to kill Guardsman Hitch and Carido had been stealthily approaching the surveyor station in the darkness for the last hour, his enhanced vision turning night into day. His name was Honsu, and in the last hour he had advanced 200 meters on his belly, centimeter by centimeter, the autosenses in his helmet alerting him to the surveyor's sweeps of the armored bunker. Each time his earpiece growled a warning, it would freeze as the questing spirits of the ancient machinery sought him out. The other members of his squad were invisible to him, but he knew that they too were slowly approaching the station. Two of their targets had left the bunker. Were they hunting? Was it just a regular patrol, or had someone inside the bunker caught something suspicious on their surveillance? Briefly, he wondered if the soldier within had reported yet. Probably not, he thought, as he watched the two morons blunder about in the dust storm. They'd passed within a meter of his position as they headed to where they thought their quarry was, making enough noise to stampede a herd of groks. Hopefully, the third soldier in the surveyor station was as pathetic as these two. He had waited, watching them wander aimlessly for nearly half an hour before seeming to come to the conclusion that their hunt was fruitless, and beginning the trek back.
Hitch and Caredo made it back to the bunker, finding nothing out of the ordinary, and as they sent in the code to open the door, Hawk could see from the cameras a giant figure raised behind them, bolt pistol in hand. He jumped to activate the door override just in time as Hitch and Caredo were shot in the head and slumped forward. And Hawk reached the weapon the bunker was equipped with, an assault cannon, and started firing blindly, careless of if he hit anything or not.
If you don't get it, Hawk is a pretty shitty guardsman, which makes what comes later pretty unique.
Hawk continued until he felt something. Wind. And then he noticed the body of Guardsman Hitch was stuck in the door of the bunker, stuck between it and the wall. He decided to reach the headless corpse and pulled it inside, so that the door could close. More bullets pinging at the entrance and one even grazing his shoulder. He managed to do it, but as the door was closing, two grenades came in with the body of Hitch. He kicked one of them in a narrow trench cut into the floor at the wall to avoid the shrapnel, but when he kicked the second, the grenade bounced and rolled back at him. Hawk launched himself behind the Vox panel as the grenade exploded, losing consciousness when the pressure wave smashed him against the wall.
As the dust settled, Honsu stepped across the shutter threshold and surveyed the devastated remains of the bunker. Blood clotted on his chest where the guardsmen had shot him, but that was the least of his concerns. The Imperial lackey had turned his carefully planned assault into a bloodbath. Two of his men were dead, blown away in the first roar of the assault cannon. A couple of grenades into the bunker had silenced the cannon, however. Frags weren't the most powerful grenades, but contained within the cramped confines of this bunker they had been devastating. He kicked the blackened, smoldering corpse of the guardsman, venting his frustration on the dead body. He ducked below the lintel of the bunker, black smoke pouring from its interior, and stood erect, Almost as tall as the bunker, Honsu was a giant of a warrior. He was clad in power armor the color of burnished iron, its surfaces pitted and scored by 3 months of living in the hostile environment of Hydra Cordatus. He wiped the dust clogging his visor and engaged the illuminator on his shoulder. The powerful glow cast a stark light across his armor, shadowing his molded breastplate and the symbol of the Iron Warriors on his right shoulder guard.
By bringing down this listening post, together with another one before coming here, Honsu had created a narrow blind spot running towards the spaceport, and it was now time to complete his mission. He started moving with his men towards the Jericho Falls spaceport, a structure squatted at the foot of the mountains. The spaceport sported a collection of 36 buildings, ranging from armored hangars for Marauder and Lightning aircrafts, fuel stations, mess halls and barracks, together with maintenance sheds. The spaceport was capable of deploying an entire attack wing of aircrafts in under 5 minutes, and it was defended by 5 companies of Juran Dragoons, the regiment of guardsmen that at the moment are stationed on all of Hydra Cordatus' defenses.
Also, Hawk is a Juran Dragoon, just to specify.
Honsu and his men stealthily approached the Jericho Falls spaceport, still not aware that 2 of their monitoring stations were now offline. Avoiding the patrols of the Juran Dragoons around the walls defending the spaceport, until they were finally in range. He gave the signal to one of his tech marines, Goran Delau, and he took out a slate with a featureless front panel from his backpack, a red light flashing on it. They had spent the last 3 months infiltrating the planet and planting down targeting beacons, and as the red light became steady, the beacons started shrieking their location into space. Now the Imperial defenders knew somebody was on the planet, and a panic erupted in the main fortress and the bastions of Jericho Falls spaceport. Bright dots of light pulsed on the map of the surrounding territory present in front of Adept Caesarin, the main Mechanicus Adept overseeing Jericho Falls systems. Each dot flashing on the map indicated one of the orbital torpedo silos or air defense batteries. He connected into the main augurs of the spaceport and reached with his senses into space. It is in the north sector that with horror he noticed the blind spots in the ring of monitoring stations around the spaceport. But even more horrifying, he could feel the presence of dozens of starships in orbit above Hydra Cordatus, seemingly appearing out of nowhere. Adept Caesarin sent out an alert code to the machine temple in the Citadel and partially to the space around the planet for help. The astropath stationed at the Citadel should be able to send out a more powerful distress signal, but as we saw in the beginning, the communications are blocked on their side, so they can't call for help at all. It is then that the Iron Warriors started bombing the Jericho Falls spaceport.
Nearly 1,000 men died in the first seconds of the Iron Warriors' initial bombardment of Jericho Falls spaceport. The battle barge Stonebreaker fired 3 salvos of magma bombs into the desolate rocky slopes surrounding the spaceport, blasting vast chunks of rock hundreds of meters into the air and flattening almost all the torpedo silos in the mountains with unerring accuracy. Alarm sirens screamed and the spaceport's weapon batteries rumbled into firing positions as their gunners desperately sought to acquire targets before being annihilated. A few hastily blessed torpedoes roared upwards through the orange skies on pillars of fiery smoke, and powerful beams of laser energy stabbed through the perpetually cloudless heavens. More bombs fell, this time within the perimeter of Jericho Falls, demolishing buildings, gouging great craters and hurling enormous clouds of umber ash into the atmosphere. Flames from burning structures lit the smoke from within and bodies lay aflame in the wreckage of the shattered spaceport. Smashed aircraft littered the ground and more exploded as the heat from the fires cooked off their weapons and fuel tanks. Bombs slammed into the rockcrete, scything little fragments everywhere. Others smashed into the runways, cratering them and melting the honeycombed adamantium with the heat of a star. The marauders and lightnings out in the open took the worst of the barrage, pulverized by the force of the explosions. The noise and confusions were unbelievable. The sky was red with flames and black with smoke. Heavy last fire blasted upwards. A number of shells impacted on the main hangar's roof. Its armored structure had absorbed the damage so far, though vast cracks now zigzag across the reinforced walls and roof. The main runway was engulfed in flames, burning pools of jet fuel spewing thick black smoke that turned day into night. Hell had come to Hydra Cordatus.
The end of the bombardments was directly followed by a rain of drop pods, as the Iron Warriors deployed down from orbit to attack the spaceport in full and conquer it for use in their own invasion of the planet. It is also here that we meet some of the other characters of the book, and for brevity we'll introduce all of them now. Firstly we have Onsu, also called the Half-Breed. He is an unofficial commander of the Iron Warriors. He is called the Half-Breed because his gene seed is half Imperial fist, which makes him very hated by the Iron Warriors. Then we have Kroger, the head of a company of Iron Warriors that mindlessly let themselves go to the predations of the Blood God. He too is starting to follow the tendencies of Khorne, but he is an arrogant and brutal commander that clashes most often than not with Onsu because of a rivalry they share from a very long time. He was also around during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy, and even fought against Fafnir Ran. And last but not least we have Forrix, one of the original Iron Warriors of the Legion from when Perturabo led them, and that now commands a company of Iron Warriors. He is a cold and calculating space marine, and the only one of this group clad in Terminator armor. War and slaughter for him have become such normalcy that he's almost bored by them, having more interest in coordinating sieges than leading them. Oh, and there is also their commander, simply named the Warsmith, which doesn't do much to be honest, and it is an Iron Warrior that is trying to ascend to demonhood. And no, he doesn't have a name, he has just a title.
They didn't even give the big bad guy a name. This is not a good start.
The Jericho Falls spaceport soon became a battlefield, with guardsmen and defense bunkers scrambling to keep the Iron Warriors at bay outside the walls, and even inside as they landed with drop pods. Heavy weapons teams blasted fortifications to pieces. The Marines ran rampant in the hangars and barracks, slaughtering hundreds within minutes. In the end, almost everyone in the spaceport was dead. A few guardsmen survived and surrendered, and were taken prisoner. But Adept Caesarin was taken in custody by the personal sorcerer of the Warsmith. As to why? We'll find out later. From there, the Iron Warriors will start reinforcing their positions and rebuilding defenses at the spaceport, in preparation for the rest of the campaign of Hydra Cordatus. Now, let's go over the defenses the Loyalists have on Hydra Cordatus that the Iron Warriors need to burst through to conquer the Citadel. There is two main bastions left. The Tor Christo, overlooking the road to the Citadel itself from the spaceport, and the Citadel itself. These are heavily fortified fortresses in their own right. High towers with artillery weapons that cover the field from the spaceport in killing zones. Heavy weapons stationed on the walls in overlapping fields of fire, all manned by the Juran Dragoons. The Citadel itself is also void shielded, at least when those void shields work, that is. But that is a little spoiler for later. The ground to reach them is also filled with mines and barbed wire, other than various defenses provided by the rocky surface of the planet, of which especially Tor Christo makes use, as it is in a more elevated position on the mountains compared to the spaceport and the Citadel. These defenses are manned by over 20,000 guardsmen of the Juran Dragoons. The Citadel is also protected by a demi-company of Titans of Legio Ignatum, and around 900 tanks are divided between Tor Christo and the Citadel, all of various patterns and configurations, from troop carriers to Liman Rasses. I want you to keep this in mind for the ending. The planet has no Skitari forces, it has no super heavy armor like Baneblades or such, it doesn't have constant void shielding, it has just a demi-company of Titans, not a full one, and especially it is not defended by any kind of Space Marine force. Now, of the commanders of the human defenders, you have to keep in mind only two names. Castellan Prestr Vauban, that is the commander of the Juran Dragoons on Hydra Cordatus.
His full name is Prestr de Roche Vauban VI.
And Lieutenant Colonel Mikhail Leonid. The plan is simple, not give the enemy any respite to consolidate his position at the spaceport, while surviving for the time needed for reinforcements to arrive, which should take from 70 to 100 days. But they are very well aware of who they are fighting, so they are wary of how much they can actually hold their fortifications for reinforcements to arrive. The Mechanicus characters in this book, I must say, are almost irrelevant, if not for two specifically, and only for I think 2 moments in the book. But anyway, there is Archmagos Ameton, which is pretty much almost physically fused to the systems of the Citadel, to the point that is mainly an head fluctuating in a tank of amniotic fluid, slowly losing his sanity. And Magos Nicaene, but of him we'll talk later. Now, as the defenders started preparing and discussing plans on how to counter the invasion of the Iron Warriors, the Chaos Marines were already preparing their next move. A column of vehicles, including Rhinors, Predators and Land Raiders, moved up on the road from the Jericho Falls spaceport, even while all the equipment, human soldiers and siege weapons were being brought down from the ships in orbit. This column was followed not far behind by an army of slaves and prisoners of the spaceport, many grievously wounded in the last battle. These slaves would have the honor to charge first against the minefields and defenses of Tor Christo, partially disguised between between the normal red-clad Chaos cultists that followed the Iron Warriors. For two reasons the Iron Warriors were using them: to clear the minefields and open a path, and to discover the range of the guns on the walls of Tor Christo, so that the program system of trenches could be built outside of it, but just barely. The slaves and soldiers were huddled together on vehicles and sent forth, as the Iron Warriors stayed behind. Many would blow up against the mines, and the ones that didn't would soon start to be bombed by the guns of Tor Christo. The gunners of the Juran Dragoons not even noticing that they were bombing their own soldiers until after the battle had ended. It was a massacre, thousands dead, and the few that survived ran back to the line of the Iron Warriors just to be cut down by bolter fire. And all of this endeavor gave the Iron Warriors the information they needed to begin their siege. Only one guardsman would survive this hell of mines and explosions, a woman called Larana Autorian, which would be chosen by Kroger to be his own personal slave. Once again, keep her name in mind, as it becomes important later. Yes, I know that I'm saying that a bit too much, but it is how the book is written that is weird. Now, while this was happening, two things were happening at the same time. At the Jericho Falls Spaceport, Forrix is overseeing the endless transports coming back and forth to carry down everything needed for the siege. And we get a special scene where we see one of the most unique things in 40k. A Tyranny dive ship enslaved to the will of the Iron Warriors, and brain dead from being infected with the Obliterator virus.
The Obliterator virus is a bit too complicated to explain swiftly, but in a few words, it is a chaos-imbued technovirus that makes your meat mesh with machines almost symbiotically.
This ship was modified by the Iron Warriors and was now used as a cargo vessel to transport nothing less than Chaos Titans. And not even random ones in this case. This ship was carrying the Titans of Legio Mortis, and especially one of the most infamous Titans in the universe of 40k, the Chaos-corrupted Imperator-class Titan known as the Dies Irae.
From the sweating darkness of its ribbed interior, two shapes slowly descended from the vessel. Cries of terror and welcome rising in equal measure as the human soldiers pressed into the service of the Iron Warriors screamed a welcome to their gods of war. The rapid reaches waved in meter-stick cable-like tentacles. Two vast battle titans of the Legio Mortis descended to Hydra Cordatus. First came their massive legs, each like the tower of a castle. Their surfaces studded with gun ports and scarred by millennia of war, followed by white torsos and armored chests. Shaped in the image of men, their resemblance to their creators ended there. Powerful arms, bearing guns larger than buildings, hung inert from wide, Terra-like shoulders. Then came the heads. And Forrix, for all his wariness of battle, could not help but be struck by the terrible power inherent in these glorious creations. Whether they had been carved, molded, or shaped by the will of the dark gods themselves, none could say. But their demonic visages shone with the power of chaos, as though a fragment of that raw energy might be contained within their hellish features. The ground shook with thunderous vibration, as the feet of these glorious machines slammed down like the tread of an angry god. The glistening cable tentacles slipped free of their charges, coiled back into the belly of their host, and vanished from sight as the next two battle titans were readied for landing. Forrix watched as the two titans stood motionless on the landing field. Their power and majesty palpable even in their stillness. A sinuous tail, bearing a spiked wrecking ball larger than the greatest super-heavy tank, twitched at the back of the largest titan, and a massive cheer burst from the assembled warriors. A powerful whine burst suddenly from the titans, as the mighty weapon arms began to move, a fierce and monstrous anime in leaving each of the war machines with vigor. The first war machine, once an Emperor-class titan in the service of the corpse god, now known and feared as the Dies Irae, took a ponderous step forward, its mighty foot crashing down on the ground with teeth losing in force, its demonic princeps eager to plunge into battle, lest his monstrous war machine turn its fury upon its allies.
And instead, in the mountains, where we saw Onsu destroy a relay bunker in the defense ring of the spaceport, Guardsman Hawks wakes up from being knocked out by the grenade that exploded inside his bunker. Confused, slightly wounded, but alive. And relatively well. He woke up and saw in horror that the spaceport had fallen into enemy hands. And he even saw the columns of vehicles moving towards the Tor Christo bastion not far from the spaceport. He scavenged for supplies, finding several weeks worth of rations and water, a portable Vox link, but very short-ranged, and 6 days of purifying pills that he must take to survive on Hydra Cordatus. Now, you cannot understand how much of a fucking problem I have with these pills. I am saving it for the ending of the video, as I am doing with many problems I have with this book. But I need to explain to you what these pills are. These pills are manufactured on planet by the Adeptus Mechanicus. Technically, as they say, the atmosphere of the planet is toxic, and the air slowly poisons you. So you need to take these pills periodically to avoid death by blood poisoning on the planet. Julius Oak has 6 days worth of them. Now, keep in mind these fucking pills for the end of the video, because they show the biggest problem this book has in such a splendid way that it is almost radiant to the stupidity of the Imperials in this book. But yeah, recognizing that he can't reunite with the other soldiers of the Juran Dragoons, Oak will decide instead to move through the mountains of Hydra Cordatus to keep an eye on the situation from above it, and try to contact his brothers in arms once he gets close enough to Tor Christo or the Citadel. The subsequent days proceeded with a tense air as a reinforced trench system was constructed. The first night, an exploratory team moving in stealth towards the walls of Tor Christo will discover secret hatches hidden in the rock to deploy artillery guns to fire directly to the ground in front of the fortress. These weapons will be crucial in the defense of Tor Christo, as they could directly target attack trenches from the front. This team was led by Onsu himself, but they will be discovered, and artillery started raining on them as they ran back. A couple of marines will be killed in the operation, but Onsu was just slightly wounded. In the meantime, after a day of walking in the mountains, Guardsman Hawk managed to establish contact with Tor Christo and the Citadel, and the news he gave were grave indeed. He saw the Titans preparing to march on the defenses, and knew that without a response from the fortress, they would bring the walls down.
Like a fucking Imperator-class Titan wouldn't have been visible from even the walls. That thing towers over mountains. I don't know why in the book they needed a warning. They just needed to have eyes.
As a result of the warning, a special military operation was organized. The Battle Titans of Legio Ignatum will move war outside of the walls, commanded by the Princeps of the Warlord Titan Imperator Bellum, Princeps Fierak. The Demi-Legio was formed by 3 warlords in total, including Imperator Bellum, 5 River Titans, and 4 Warhound Scout Titans. Thousands of Imperial Guard soldiers will join them in the assault, supported by 500 vehicles, a mix of battle tanks and armored transports. The plan was simple. The vanguard of the Imperial Guard will break through the trench lines with heavy weapon support from the Titans to take the fight to the enemy. And then the Titans will deploy to fight any enemy Titan that would engage the attack after their role as support was completed, and the fighting moved to the trenches. The Imperial Guard assault was guided by Lieutenant Colonel Leonid, but in the Iron Warriors line, the attack was already spotted and countermeasures had been taken. Hundreds of vehicles were preparing to counter-assault the enemy, together with forces of Marines under Onsu, Kroger, and Forrix, and their Iron Warriors. As the attack advanced, the trench lines of the Iron Warriors were quiet, maybe even too much so. But everything will go wrong when Princeps Fierak will see the Titans of Legio Mortis behind the enemy lines.
Fierak saw the kill banner hanging between the gargantuan towers of the Titan's legs, and the host of blasphemous symbols that writhed there. Hot anger flooded him as he knew that some of those markings must represent Titans and Princeps from Legio Ignatum. The beast said was plucked from his worst nightmares. A hellish fusion of machine and demon, the very image of death. Legio Mortis, the ancient foe, and not only that, if he was not mistaken, this diabolical machine was none other than the dreaded Dies Irae, that infernal blasphemy that had breached the walls of the Emperor's palace at the dawn of the Imperium. Here, on Hydra Cordatus, could the warrior of the Legio Ignatum ask for anything more? Fierak's lip curled in hatred, and burning excitement coursed through his veins at the thought of combating this monster from the dawn of time. A primal battle fought between 2 ancient foes. The honor that would be his at having finally brought down the Legion's most ancient nemesis was immeasurable. Fierak roared in battle fury. Clavis Regni, honoris causa, and battle group sword with me, Ignatum!
Princeps,
carried Cullen.
are you sure? Such a maneuver will leave the Jorans dangerously exposed.
Damn the Jorans, bellowed Fierak. I want that Titan. Now be silent and follow me. Fierak bellowed to engineer Ulandro for more speed and activated the Imperator Bellum's massive chain fist as he charged into battle.
The Titans abandoned the original plan to reach Irae and destroy it. This would have heavy ramifications on the future events of Hydra Cordatus. Meanwhile, the armored assault of the Jurans was still proceeding as planned, as they got closer and closer to the trench system of the Iron Warriors. But as they noticed that the Titans' support fire was not hitting the trenches, a missile departed one of the armored bunkers of the trench lines and hit a Lima Russ battle tank in the side, blowing it apart in a black fireball. The shot was the signal, and the entire trench line opened fire. Missiles, las cannons and heavy bolters opened sequentially from the trench line, destroying all the closest vehicles to the edge of the trench and starting to pick off the tanks and chimeras with ease, aided soon after by the weapons of the rest of the Titans of Legio Mortis. Even the vehicle of Leonid would be hit, but him and his command squad will manage to get out before he burned from the internal fires. Hundreds died in minutes and the assault was shattered. Even when Leonid tried to lead a charge and almost reached the edge of the trench line, he would be hit, his flak vest saving his life even if he was thrown to the side all the same. All of this while Princess Fierak and her Titans battle group were facing off against Irae. To put it simply, because what happened next is decently complicated, the battle group of Princess Fierak will be decimated, with only one of the warlords and two of the rivers coming back, while Fierak wounded and managed to disable one of the legs of Irae, freezing it in place when its own plasma reactor went into meltdown. Meanwhile, the Juran Dragoons would suffer grievous losses. The only reason they were able to regroup and retreat at all was that two Warhound Titans, that were defending the opposite flanks to the Princeps, weren't able to join the assault against Irae because too far, and finally came to give support to the armored assault. Their Vulcan Mega Bolters raking the trenches and turning into mist anybody that emerged to shoot. But as the Jurans retreated, the Iron Warriors were ready, and now a countercharge from their trenches would slaughter them as they retreated.
Further speculation was ended when a deafening roar soared through the front ranks, blasting dozens of men on the firing step to shreds. Heavy caliber shells ripped apart the lip of the trench in a hail of fire, sending earth and bodies flying in all directions, and a fierce grin broke on Kruger's face. Through the billowing smoke, he could make out the blurred outline of what looked like a scout titan. He jogged quickly to his rhino, jumping onto the running boards and hammering his fist upon its roof, following Forix's land raiders through the gateway and into the smoke of battle. Kruger stood tall and raised his chainsword for all his warriors to see. Death to the followers of the false emperor!
The retreat was as bloody as the charge. Warbands of rampaging space marines and chaos armor putting down a hail of bolter fire and slashing to pieces entire squads once they reached them with their superior speed. Even the Warhounds will be damaged in the retreat, and the assault of the traitors will stop only when the retreating Rivers and the Warlord started opening fire on their attack line, killing hundreds of humans and dozens of marines in seconds. Leonidas survived the attack, but it was a massacre to say the least. The majority of the vehicles destroyed, thousands slaughtered. The attack was a complete and utter failure. Irae was disabled, that much was true, even if the enemy was working to bring him back into the battle. But Gunnar Tedeschi, the commander of the defenses of Tor Christo, knew that the bastion would fall. It was just a matter of time, and had planned accordingly. Tor Christo would hold out as long as possible, and a general retreat would be called when the fortress itself was breached. And he himself would trigger the self-destruct sequence that would obliterate it together with the mountain it was built upon. As the defenders prepared for battle, the reinforced attack trenches advanced from the Iron Warriors line to Tor Christo, getting in range to deploy their own artillery against its walls to breach them.
Remember, Tor Christo, for some reason, doesn't have any void shielding. Make it make sense with what we find out later.
It had been a week at this point from the failed assault against the Iron Warriors line, and while the gunners of Tor Christo were doing their best to keep raining artillery on the advancing Iron Warriors trenches, it was impossible to stop them. On the morning of the 11th day of the siege, the firing positions in the trench lines were ready, and Forix gave the order to drag forward his special and heavy artillery. Demon engines possessed artillery weapons that would tear the walls to shreds in a matter of hours. Once they were in position, he gave the order to fire. Bombs started raining against the walls and inside Tor Christo, killing dozens as the heavy explosives detonated in between buildings. The hours of bombardments dragged on, and in all of this, Onsu and Forix were preparing to assault the fortress itself. Onsu and his Iron Warriors would assault the breach in the walls once it opened, and Forix and his Terminators instead were in waiting under the walls, near the secret hatches to deploy heavy guns Onsu had discovered. They were waiting for the guns to deploy and for the hatches to open, so that they could storm the fortress from the walls and the inside at the same time. Finally, at dusk, Major Tedeschi gave the order for the secret guns to be deployed.
Foryx stalked through the cratered wasteland and secreted himself less than 50 meters from the entrance to the concealed artillery pits. His veteran warriors filed into position alongside him and waited, the noise of the shelling swallowing the thump of their heavy footfalls. They did not have long to wait. A sliver of light and rumbling of heavy rolling stock grinding along the rails announced that the guns were indeed moving into position.
Hansu,
Hissed Foryx, rising to his feet and charging towards the guns.
go now!
Hansu snarled in anticipation as he heard Foryx's words echo within his helm and kicked down the sandbag barricade that led from the forward parallel onto the plain. He sprinted forward, the iron warriors fanning out behind him as they raced across the uneven ground towards the base of the steep rocky slope. Behind him, thousands of red-clad soldiers climbed from the trench and the guns continued to fire, pounding the walls to breach the central bastion. The augmented fiber bundle muscles of their armor powered the iron warriors upward, leaving the human soldiers floundering in their wake, stumbling around in the strobing, shell-lit twilight. He and his warriors would be first to reach the fortress. This type of action had once been known as a forlorn hope, because the first man into the breach would invariably be the first man to die. It was the duty of the Hope to draw the enemy fighters the remainder of the force close with the fortress. The men of the Hope would storm the breach and buy time with their lives for the following troops to push through. Hundreds of men might be sacrificed in this way simply to get a handful through the breach.
As Foryx infiltrated the secret gunning positions, slaughtering everyone barring his way, Hansu reached the newly formed breach in the walls with his warriors and started climbing, while the guardsmen at the top were shooting down at them with everything they had, throwing down grenades, explosives, even demolition charges to keep the Iron Warriors at bay. Dozens of Iron Warriors and hundreds of humans died in the assault, but in the end, Hansu climbed to the top of the breach and started killing the Juran Dragoons trying to contain the assault.
More enemies closed in around him as he shot, cut, stabbed, kicked and punched a red ruin through the defenders, roaring in triumph as the warriors of his company climbed onto the walls, sweeping left and right along the ramparts. Bolters fired again and again, and men died in droves as the Iron Warriors took the ramparts of Cain Bastion in blood and steel. Silhouetted in the flames of the defenders' route, Hansu leapt for the courtyard below, the stonework cracking under his weight. Enemy soldiers streamed towards the narrow neck of the bastion, Iron Warriors in hot pursuit. The momentum of the charge must not be lost. Despite this success, there were sure to be thousands more soldiers in the bastions either side of this one. Hansu ran through the confusion of the battle, firing as he ran and cutting down those soldiers not quick enough to escape. At the neck of the bastion he saw the Imperial troopers were heading for a wide trench, crossed by a narrow bridge. Troops bottleneck on the crossing, despite the desperate shouts of officers for them not to. As Hansu watched, the bridge collapsed into the trench, crushing those unfortunates to be trapped beneath it. Some soldiers dropped into the trench, turning to fire on the Iron Warriors, but many more were streaming in panic to the main esplanade where a squat, round tower crouched at the base of the steep escarpment. Black-coated officers in skull-embossed peak caps bellowed orders for their men to stand firm, enforcing these orders with bullets. Hansu let them shoot their own men, blasting holes in those enemy soldiers who weren't running. A swelling roar of hate filled the night as the Iron Warriors' indentured soldiery swarmed over the walls, fanning out towards the stairs or simply jumping into the courtyard. The bastion was theirs. Now they just had to break out of it. Stuttering volleys of last fire blasted from the trench, but it was too little, too late, as Hansu dropped into the prepared position and killed with wanton abandon. His sword chopped through a terrified guardsman, the reverse stroke disemboweling another. He worked his way down the trench, hacking a bloody path through the defenders who fell back in horror from his deadly blade. As Hansu killed the guardsman, he reveled in his superiority, and could well understand the attraction of Khorne's path. The Iron Warriors swept over the trench, killing everything in it, with the fury of those who had fought their way through hell and lived to tell the tale, butchering anything that came within reach.
At that point, Tor Christo had fallen. It was just a matter of time. It is now that Major Tedeschi gave the Evans Falls signal, a general retreat signal to all forces of Tor Christo, that would use a secret tunnel under the bastion to retreat to the Citadel, while Tedeschi stood behind to blow up the fortress by overloading the plasma reactor powering it. But this was an eventuality the Mechanicus on Hydra Cordatus did not like one bit. As thousands of soldiers ran into the tunnel to flee the Citadel, Archmagos Ameton, pushed mainly by the suggestion of Magos Nicaea, seen had the tunnel mined with demolition charges, and when the signal was broadcasted to all Vox communicators of the defenders, they decided that they could not let the Iron Warriors use the tunnel. They blew up the charges and collapsed the entire tunnel with the defenders inside of it, killing over 3,000 guardsmen that were crushed by hundreds of tons of rocks. As this was happening, Major Tedeschi was moving with a Mechanicus, called Megos Yelede, to reach the plasma reactor in the core of Tor Christo to blow everything up. But Yelede was given the order to not open the door to him, even when the Major threatened him with a bolt gun to his head. This order will be overwritten when Forrix appeared, forcing open the doors of an elevator shaft and emerging in his bloody Terminator armor. The two will rush inside and seal the armored door, trying to start the meltdown process in time, but Forrix and his Iron Warriors managed to smash down the doors in time, killing Yelede and wounding Tedeschi as he tried to finish the meltdown of the reactor. They had failed to activate the self-destruct sequence in time. Tor Christo had fallen, and worse, it was now in the hands of the Iron Warriors. The only fortress left standing on all of Hydra Cordatus now was the Citadel. Castellan Vauban was witness to Forrix throwing the wounded body of Major Tedeschi to his death from the battlements of Mars Bastion at the end of the battle for Tor Christo. Now, you have to keep in mind the scope of a lore video, because there are a bunch of interfaction and interpersonal conflicts between a bunch of characters that I'm not telling you about. I am here to tell you how the events played out. If you want to know exactly what happened, every conversation, every insult, every veiled threats everybody was exchanging with each other during the story, it is very easy to do that. Go and read the book. But for once I need to get into some of the events not relating to the war itself, at least for a second. First thing, after the death of Princeps Fierak, the rest of the Legio fell under command of Princeps Daekian, pilot of the Warlord Titan honoris causa, pretty ashamed of the actions of Fierak and aware of their consequences. And here we also plainly find out, as readers, not in the story, that Niacin is a traitor. Yes, this is where it clicks for me that he is the traitor that at the beginning silenced the astropathic relay. For the simple retelling he gives of the events that led to the collapse of the tunnel where 3,000 men died while fleeing. He retells a completely different version of the story of what happened with the Archmagos and the plan to blow up the tunnel, where he begged and pleaded with the Archmagos not to do it, to give the retreating soldiers more time. When if anything, when we read those events in the book when they were talking alone, it was his idea to collapse the tunnel and push for it to be done by playing on the collapsing mind of the Archmagos and putting the fear of the Iron Warriors using it into him. And yeah, little spoiler, it is confirmed later in the book that he was the traitor all along.
I want to see the unreliable narrator preachers try to defend this one.
In all of these events, Oak was still in the mountains relaying information to the Juran Dragoons on the enemy, but they too had noticed that something was weird with how precise some of the bombardments of the Jurans were, and sent out an Iron Warrior to try and find whoever was spying on them. On the 20th day of the siege, the attack trenches were now moving from Tor Christo to the Citadel, with guns from the now first front line and even the promontory of the newly conquered Tor Christo starting to rain artillery shells on the Citadel itself. His voice shields were linked to the mind of Archmagos Sameton, and he was struggling to keep them up as his mind was even now slowly dying from his 600 years of service to the Citadel. Now, Castellan Vauban had devised two plans to try and delay the Iron Warriors' assault on the Citadel. One involving himself, the Jurans, and a new unexpected ally that had arrived in the covert of night, and one involving Guardsman Oak in the mountains, unknowingly hunted by an Iron Warrior and several cultists. Oak will be guided to an underground hidden facility in the mountains, which will reveal itself to be a surviving torpedo silo. One of those the Iron Warriors are not destroyed. The Magos on his communicator will then start to guide him on how to arm the torpedo. On the same night as Oak was arming the torpedo, followed by nearly 2,000 men, Castellan Prest Vauban was leading a stealthy advance towards the Iron Warriors' lines from the walls of the Citadel, moving in the dark and in absolute silence. They almost reached the trenches when they were spotted, killing the Chaos soldiers that had seen them and then gunning down the one that was sounding the alarm. But it was too late at that point.
Sirens screamed, piercing the night with their cries, and Vauban knew that with the element of surprise lost, they had only a limited time to achieve their objective before they would have to fall back. He climbed the steep exterior slope of the earthworks, using the butt of his pistol for purchase. His soldiers scrambled over the parapet with a roar of released fury. A grenade detonated nearby, showering him with earth, and he slipped, feet scrabbling for grip. A gauntleted hand reached down and closed on his wrist, lifting him easily across the parapet in a single motion. He was deposited on the firing step beside a broken corpse. He swiftly drew his power sword. The Space Marine who had hauled him over the parapet turned and began firing a bolt gun into a mass of enemy soldiers in red overalls. His brethren were pushing further into the entrenchments as the Imperial Guard scrambled over the parapet and into the battery. "Thank you, brother Captain Ishara," said Vaban breathlessly. The Imperial Fist's captain nodded, slammed a fresh magazine into his bolter and said, "Thank me later. We have work to do," before turning and charging from the firing step. Gunfire and explosions lit the trenches and dugouts of the battery with strobing lights, screaming soldiers and wooden men providing a cacophonous backdrop to the attack. Hundreds of Jorans poured over the earthwork, killing anything in their path. The Chaos soldiery had been caught largely unawares, and the Imperial troops offered no quarter to the unready foe. Storming parties slaughtered the enemy soldiers, shooting them where they lay or stabbing them with bayonets as they scrambled for weapons.
And now imagine what you are wondering. When did the Imperial Fists get here? Well, it is explained later in the book, but let's explain it now just to disband some confusion.
The Justitia Fides, our strike cruiser, was about to make the jump into the Imperium when the astropaths reported a faint distress signal emanating from this planet, explained Captain Ishara. The prefix on the signal was of sufficient urgency that I immediately ordered them to pass it on to the naval base at Adrafa before turning the ship back to Hydra Cordatus. But what about the enemy vessels in orbit? We narrowly avoided detection by a Chaos warship near the jump point, but once we were clear, I ordered best speed to the source of the distress signal. It was a relatively simple matter to evade detection by the cargo hulks in orbit, but to avoid being spotted by enemy ground troops, we flew the Thunderhawks to the mountains, some 100 kilometers north of this fastness. After that, we simply crossed the mountains on foot to reach you. Leonid still marveled at the Shara's casual description of his man's incredible journey across the mountains. 2 days to cross some of the most inhospitable terrain Leonid had ever seen. It had taken Guardsman Hawk almost a full day to cross 8 kilometers, never mind 100.
Violent fighting exploded in the trenches as the entire third company of the Imperial Fists, led by brother Captain Ishara, assaulted the enemy lines with 2,000 soldiers of the Juran Dragoons. Their objective was simple, destroying the heavy demon engines artilleries of the enemy so that they could not pound the walls of the Citadel to dust like they did the ones of Tor Christo. Guardsmen fought against red-clad Chaos soldiers. Imperial Fists started fighting and killing Iron Warriors that were intervening to try and stop the enemy from destroying their guns. The violent fighting became even worse as the destroyed demon engines released demons in ethereal forms in the trenches. This is the first time even Onsu will be possessed by a demon, killing several Imperial Fists with his powers before it vanished. The night was illuminated by last gunfire, grenades, and demolition charges exploding, and bolt gunfire streaming across both sides of the trench. Meanwhile, Hawk was imprisoned to farming the Torpedo for good, but after loading the coordinates of launch into it, he would be attacked by the Iron Warrior and his squad inside the bunker. A violent fight would ensue between the few cultists he had brought and Hawk, but the pride of the Iron Warrior would be his end. In a panic, Hawk pressed buttons on the console of the Torpedo and managed to launch it, escaping the room as it was engulfed by fire and narrowly avoiding his death as the Torpedo launched. The Iron Warrior would perish in the inferno of the Torpedo room. The fighting in the trenches on the ground was still ongoing when the Glaive-class ground-launched orbital Torpedo climbed rapidly through the red sky of Hydra Cordatus, lighting the battlefields below with its brilliant glare. Forrix, stationed in Tor Christo and over the promontory, was observing the fighting happening below with a silent hatred for the incompetence of Onsu and Kroger, as they were letting the enemy destroy their precious siege guns, when he finally observed the Torpedo disappear in orbit, before realizing what his trajectory was as the loyalist forces on the ground started retreating.
He'd watched the Spear of Light roar from the mountains to the east of the Citadel, and had experienced some moments unease as he watched the orbital Torpedo climb higher and higher. How had it been fired, and where was it bound? But these questions seem largely irrelevant now, as it had streaked into the heavens, then vanished through the clouds. Forrix returned his attention to the battle below, sneering in contempt as he saw the Imperials begin to pull back under the fury of the Iron Warriors' counterattack. He saw Honsul leading a rabble of soldiers through the battery, killing those not quick enough to make their escape, and smiled grimly. He crossed the entrenchment on long flat sheets of metal, stopping as a sudden premonition sent a shiver along his spine. He craned his neck upwards. The sky was, as usual, the color of blood, lit by reflected flashes of explosions from below. What had made him look up? Then he saw it. a burning dot of light high in the sky, arcing down towards the planet at fantastic speed. Foryx's jaw hung slack as he realized the ultimate destination of the torpedo. Hot anger flooded his body as he watched molten streamers of light flare from the torpedo as it entered the lower atmosphere. He bolted for the keep, shouting a vox of warning to the warriors inside. "By all there is unholy, raise the keep's void shield!" He lumbered towards the sunken blast doors that lay within, casting a hurried glance over his shoulder. The burning corona of fire that surrounded the torpedo appeared to him like a baleful eye in the heavens, aimed straight for his heart. Foryx entered the keep, hammering his fist across the door-closing mechanism, and set off towards its commanding center. He heard the pervasive hum of the void shield generator buried beneath the tower powering up, and fervently hoped that it would raise in time. For if it did not, he and everyone in the keep were as good as dead. The torpedo impacted almost exactly in the center of the main bastion of Tor Christo, where its triple-stage warhead detonated with devastating results. The lead element of the warhead was designed to crater an opening through the thick hull of a starship, where the tail element would explode simultaneously, acting as a propellant and hurling the middle charge deep within its target. But instead of the meter-stick reinforced adamantium bulkhead of a starship, the torpedoes land into the ground of the main bastion, traveling at over 1,000 kilometers an hour. The first stage of the torpedo exploded with phenomenal power, flattening everything within 300 meters and blasting a crater 50 meters deep. The tail section blew and thrust the torpedo deeper into the rock of the promontory, where the more powerful center charge detonated with the power of a sun, ripping the rock of Tor Christo apart. Night became day as blinding light fountained from the impact. Tank-sized chunks of stone were hurled through the air like pebbles as an expanding wave of blinding smoke and dust filled the valley. The thunderclap of detonation was like the hammer of the gods, come to smite the surface of the planet, and a surging mushroom cloud billowed 1,000 meters into the sky, hurling ash and burning rock in all directions. The rampart of the bastions either side of the torpedo's impact sagged and cracked, the rock-rich walls splitting under forces they were never designed to endure. The crater in the center of the promontory expanded with terrifying rapidity, tons of rubble and artillery pieces collapsing into the fiery pit. With a tortured groan, millions of tons of stone cracked and rumbled, sliding free of the slopes of the promontory, crashing down a rocky tidal wave of destruction. The western end of the first parallel was buried beneath the avalanche of rock, and the zigzag approach steps leading to the second parallel filled and collapsed. Thousands died screaming as they were crushed beneath the sweeping tide of earth. The battery constructed before the walls of the Vinker bastion vanished in a torrential downpour of earth and rock, the guns buried forever beneath thousands of tons of debris.
Tor Christo was obliterated in an apocalyptic explosion of pure and raw energy. The entire battlefield in front of the Citadel was showered in dust and giant rocks. The energy was so powerful that human and space marine alike were sent down from the speed of the winds. And even Titans stationed far away like DS Irae, still being repaired after the first Titan battle, shivered from the pure energy unleashed. The retreat on the ground was not yet completed, and it is as Castellan Vauban got up from the ground, half stunned by the distant explosion, that he walked to the wrong side, and found himself face to face with none other than Onsu himself. The two would present to one another, then draw their blades, and prepare to fight in a duel. And the duel, surprisingly, not only wasn't one-sided, between a human and a fully fledged space marine of chaos, but Vauban managed to cut off one of Onsu's arms in the fight. So if Onsu has a metal arm, it's technically because the human commander of Hydra Cordatus cut it off before losing the duel.
Onsu retreated and Vauban followed with a grin of anticipation, launching himself at Onsu with fresh vigor. Onsu was a powerful warrior, but Prestry Vauban had been a student of soulplay his entire life, and each attack drew fresh blood from his adversary. He hammered his enemy's defenses again and again, forcing him slowly backwards until Onsu stumbled and lost his footing. Vauban spun left and struck out at Onsu's sword arm. Onsu was quick, bringing his block up just in time to intercept the blow, and their weapons met in a coruscating hail of sparks. Vauban roared as Onsu's blade snapped and his own smashed home. The Iron Warrior grunted in pain as his arm was severed just above the elbow. Onsu retreated, stumbling as blood sprayed from the stump of his arm. Seizing the opportunity opportunity, Vauban leapt in to deliver the death blow, but at the last second realized that Honshu had lured him into the attack. Honshu roared and stepped to meet Vauban, slamming inside his guard and hammering the snap length of his sword blade through his silver breastplate and into his heart. White-hot pain flooded Vauban as Honshu twisted the blade, bright blood pouring down his chest and darkness veiling his sight. Had he heard someone crying his name? He felt his lifeblood pouring from him and looked into the eyes of his killer. "Damn you," he whispered. "That happened a long time ago, human," hissed Honshu, but Vauban was already dead.
And like this, Castellan Vauban was dead, and to his place was promoted Colonel Mikhail Leonid. With their siege weapons destroyed and with Tor Christo now in pieces, the Iron Warriors will need to change strategy to assault the Citadel, but this just delayed their efforts. The war for Hydra Cordatus was still ongoing.
So, Honshu the Half-Breed managed to lose an arm to a human, in a sword fight.
Yeah, to be honest, seeing some of the problems the book has, this seems very small in comparison.
Listen, I know it probably is very far from how canon works, but at the same time, ha! Come on Iron Warrior hell!
As the remains of Castellan Prester Vauban were put to rest in a mausoleum, the new commander in charge, Mikhail Leonid, started organizing with the remainder of his forces to prepare a plan of defense. Aided by the Imperial Fist of the 3rd Company that also got to work to reinforce the defenses, bunkers, and repair even the walls from the bombardments that had already damaged them. Meanwhile, outside of their walls, Forrix and his men had survived the bombing of Tor Christo, and he was now at work with other Iron Warriors into digging advancing attack trenches to reach the walls of the Citadel. It is also here that Forrix, and us by reflex, finally learns why in the fuck the Iron Warriors are attacking in such a force Hydra Cordatus. The planet is in fact a secret Mechanicus base and laboratory. In fact, under the Citadel, in a cave system, there is a deposit, an entire bunker filled with loyalist space marine gene seed. And I'm quoting Kelmaur the Sorcerer here directly from the book. In this bunker there is enough genetic material to create legions of space marines. And the warsmith of all the Iron Warriors on the planet is here to take it for Abaddon the Despoiler in preparation for the 13th Black Crusade. If he accomplishes this mission, he will ascend to demonhood. The new plan to assault the Citadel now was to assault the walls from underground, digging tunnels under them and mine them with explosives, to bring the entire walls down all at once and assault the Citadel with overwhelming forces supported by artillery tanks blasting at the defenders on the wall. The Space Marines will try to run several operations by digging tunnels of their own to assault the Iron Warriors and collapse their tunnels before they reach the walls. But those operations failed, one of them even leaving Forrix at death's door when he fought off 2 entire squads of Imperial Fists alone. And with the failure of those counterattacks, the walls were as good as destroyed. And in fact, it would take only 3 days before the attack started.
3 days after the attack on the tunnels, a terrible rumbling rocked the walls of the Citadel, like the beginnings of an earthquake. The ground beneath the fortress heaved upwards and cracks split the roadways through the inner walls. Along the edge of the ditch, a huge wall of fire and smoke leapt upwards as explosives planted there blasted its crest apart, scattering rubble into the ditch and providing a means for infantry to descend into it. But barely had the dust settled when an explosion of far greater magnitude shook the ground. Wide galleries that ran underneath the curtain wall linking the Destiny Gate and the right flank of the Mori bastion collapsed as vast quantity of ordnance detonated and vaporized huge swathes of the wall's foundations. The center section of the Great Wall groaned as it sagged, the noise swelling as a giant crack split the curtain wall, the sound like a deafening gunshot. Officers shouted at their men to clear the walls, but for many it was already too late as the 60-meter-high wall slid ponderously into the ground, huge chunks of rockrit shearing away and tumbling into the ditch. Hundreds of men were carried to their deaths and vast clouds of dust billowed skyward. As more of the wall fell, the speed of its collapse increased exponentially, whole sections of the ramparts toppling into the ditch. The scale of the destruction was incredible, and it seemed inconceivable that such a mighty edifice could be so thoroughly annihilated. By the time the collapse had ceased, almost the entire center of the wall had been brought down. A great breach some 30 meters wide had been torn in the curtain wall, the rubble from the wall's destruction forming a debris slope that ran from the floor of the ditch to the crest crest of the breach, the Iron Warriors had broken open the Citadel.
As the wall split open, the assault from the trenches of the Iron Warriors started. And for 3 entire days, thousands of soldiers charged up the slope leading to the breach, only to die and be repelled by the defenders of the Juran Dragoons, supported by the Space Marines of the Imperial Fist 3rd Company. In the meantime of the walls being breached, something else was happening outside of the Citadel and inside, but away from the battle. Remember Adept Caesarin, the Mechanicus overseeing the Jericho Fall Spaceport? Well, he was mutated by Sorcerer Kelmaur of the Iron Warriors using the Obliterator virus. And now, as a creature partially organic, partially cybernetic, and completely corrupted by chaos, using a strange magic ritual, he was teleported in the mausoleum of the Citadel, where he would be met by the now confirmed traitor Magos Nycin. As the dawn of the 4th day of the walls being breached came up, Onsu, a newly healed and partially cybernetically enhanced Forrix, and Kroger were preparing for a decisive assault on the Citadel. But there is only one problem with what I just said. Kroger is dead. The person wearing his armor from this point onward isn't him.
Wait, what?
Exactly. You see, Pio, Kroger was slowly losing his mind to the predations of the Chaos God Khorne, and he was turning into a mindless berserker as the siege went on. His armor was possessed by a demon that was mighty tired of Kroger and his mindless slaughter. So, he decided to corrupt the most hateful creature it had around at that point, Kroger personal slave, Larana Autorian. When she wore the armor corrupted her and transformed her into an avatar of the Blood God. She then proceeded to kill Kroger in brutal fashion and take his place in the battle. And you want to know how powerful her hatred of Kroger and her anger to her entire situation made her after being Kroger's slave for weeks? So powerful that even Onsu knew that whatever Kroger had become, to engage him now meant death.
Forrix and his men gathered in the approach trench that zigzagged its way back from the 3rd parallel, and Onsu could see the veteran captain was becoming more used to his mechanized body with each step. At the far end of the parallel, Kroger stood motionless before the firing step of the earthwork, staring intently towards the breach he would soon be attacking. Normally Kruger would be strutting up and down the length of the parallel, boasting his prowess and heaping scorn upon Onsu, but there was nothing now. Merely a sinister silence. Onsu had approached Kroger as dawn had broken, sensing the change that had overtaken his nemesis more clearly than ever. "The warsmith honors you, Kroger," he had said. But Kroger had not answered him, nor even acknowledged his presence. "Kroger?" repeated Onsu, reaching up to grip the edge of Kruger's shoulder guard. As soon as Onsu's hand touched the metal of the armor, Kruger's hand shot up and gripped his wrist, wrenching it away and pushing him back. Onsu snarled, drawing his sword partway from its scabbard, but Kroger turned, and Onsu was seized by a dire premonition that to attack Kroger would be to die. A pale nimbus of light played around Kroger's helmet, and though he couldn't be sure, Onsu thought he could see that same light seeping through the visor of Kroger's helmet. The light carried hints of ancient malevolence, and Onsu had slowly sheathed its sword, turning on his heel and returning to his company.
At that point, over 100 Vindicator siege tanks started bombing the entirety of the length of the wall to reduce as much of it as possible to rubble. And when they finally pulled back, the attack started. Hundreds of Iron Warriors and thousands of human soldiers, supported by tanks and heavy weapons infantry, charge against every breach in the wall. Many falling to defense fire or against the Imperial Fist protecting every gap in the heavy fortifications. Onsu's part of the assault was successful, the one of Forrix less so, as the men found the breach in the wall defended by the 2 remaining Warhound Titans of the Imperials, getting stuck fighting there as there was no way to cross with them pumping Vulcan Mega Bolters rounds into it. Larana instead not only had dominated her part of the assault, slaughtering everyone, attacker or defender alike, uncaring of whatever she killed, but she even killed the Librarian Corwin of the Imperial Fist when he tried to stop her. She created so much slaughter in fact that a portal to the warp had opened inside the Citadel.
Librarian Corwin closed his eyes and died without a sound as the Avatar's blade split him in two. Both halves of his body sucked into the black tear opened in space and time. The Avatar feasted on the slaughter it had caused, sensing the oceans of blood yet to be shed through the gateway it sought, loathed with death had torn into the world. Galaxies of billions upon billions of souls awaited harvest and feeding to the Blood God. There were realms where the time it had wasted here was but the blink of an eye, where there were slaughters that would perhaps one day assuage Khorne's hunger. The Avatar laughed, knowing that such a thing could not come to pass. The Blood God's hunger was a depthless ocean and will never be sated. New life and new purpose thundered through the bulging fabric of its armor as the pool of fresh souls suffused it. Larana Autorian continued to scream inside her mind as she saw the eternity of slaughter that lay before her, and all the deaths to come. She screamed because she realized that some vile part of her soul desired this. Without a backward glance, the Avatar abandoned Hydra Cordatus to its fate, stepping through the dark portal to a time and place beyond mortal understanding. An age of battle awaited, and it had time without end to be part of it.
So, Kroger, or better La Rana, disappeared from Hydra Cordatus. Forrix was stuck, and also joined him to help him complete his assault on the walls. But without heavy support, they could not take on the War Hounds alone. It is then that Dies Irae appeared in the distance, every step making the earth tremble as he strode towards the Citadel, its leg functional enough to let it walk. Princeps Daekian and the two remaining River Titans, partially repaired after the first battle against the enemy Titans, were ready to meet him. A violent battle ensued as the Titans fought at the wall of the Citadel, the warlord trying to keep the attention of the Imperator on itself as the Rivers pounded him with everything they had, but they were visibly outmatched. The two Rivers were destroyed by the sheer volume of fire the weapons of Dies Irae unleashed, leaving Princess Daekian and his warlord, the Honoris Causa, to finish what Princess Fierak had started. As the Titan war machines fought, they came closer and closer, until they started slamming into each other in melee range to try and kill their enemy. It is then that Princess Daekian rammed his battle claw against the softened midsection of Dies Irae's reactor chamber, already an open wound inflicted by Princess Fierak. His claw punched through and gripped the plasma reactor of Dies Irae, crushing it in its hand before both Titans, heavily damaged and next to meltdown, fell down against the walls of the Citadel.
For a second, Onsu thought Forrix was about to rebuke him again, but the fury drained from his eyes and he nodded, turning without a word and scrambling down the breach. Onsu followed him, and the Iron Warriors retreated from the walls, falling back to the ditch in disciplined groups. As he clambered over an iron bar-studded chunk of rockcrete, the day was lit by a terrible brightness. The sky was bleached of color, and everything before him was bathed in the blinding light of a star. The Dies Irae was enveloped in a dazzling ball of incandescent fire, huge sprays of plasma gouting from its belly. The enemy Titan with the burning white eyes had its fist buried in its guts, tearing and destroying the magnificent demon machine. Locked together, the two Titans wrestled to escape each other's grip, the ground heaving with their battle. As Onsu watched, a terrible groaning rent the air as the two machines rocked past their combined center of gravity and slowly began to fall towards them into the ditch. "Run!" he shouted, all thought of a disciplined retreat forgotten in the face of this new danger. He sprinted past the raveling and leapt up the rubble slopes of the ditch as the two war machines slammed into the outer face of the curtain wall between Vinker Bastion and the gate. Their massive bodies scraped down its face, trailing flaming sheets of burning plasma and ripping another great tear in the walls. Onsu scrambled over the lip of the ditch, desperate to reach the safety of the earthworks. Forrix ran alongside him, his new bionics enhancing his speed despite the Terminator armor he wore. The two Titans slammed into the ground, the impact throwing Onsu from his feet and hurling him forward. He smashed into the top of the earthworks, rolling over its top as a river of plasma spilled from the ruptured reactors of the Titans. Burning plasma flooded the ditch, incinerating the corpses that filled it in an instant. The Primus Ravelin was destroyed, crushed beneath thousands of tons of armorplast and ceramite. Huge flames and geysers of magma-hot steam ripped along the ditch, vitrifying the rocks throughout its length. Razor-sharp chunks of white-hot debris rained down inside the Citadel, one shot from the Honoris Causa's bridge section hammering through a section of ramparts less than 5 meters from Castella Leonid.
The first attack of the Iron Warriors had failed, but it was clear that it was just delaying the inevitable. Only the two Warhound Titans were left active. The company of Space Marines was now at less than half strength, and the human defenders were broken as they retreated to their last line of defense in the center of the Citadel. But it is here that we learn something interesting from brother Captain Alaric Shara. We discover, as he talked with Leonid about the pills he was taking, not only that the atmosphere on the planet of Hydra Cordatus is safe to breathe, albeit unpleasant because of the smell of ash of this rocky desert world, but that actually the pills they are taking are pretty much poisonous. They were slowly poisoning every Imperial Guardsman station on Hydra Cordatus and giving all of them cancer in a matter of years to preserve the secrets of Hydra Cordatus that any human defending it might discover. Leonid was enraged, and he moved to reach the inner sanctum of the Mechanicus to confront Archmagos Ameton face to face, accompanied by his own bodyguards and Captain Shara himself. As they reached the doors of the inner sanctum, however, they saw Nisin pushing inside somebody before sealing the doors, and they were engaged by two Praetorian battle servitors that tried to stop them. Many of Leonid's men would die, but in the end they managed to destroy them and break into the inner sanctum, only to find that Archmagos Ameton was dead. dead. In his place, connecting himself to every system of the Citadel under supervision of Nicene, was the mutated grotesque body of Adept Caesarin, that started to turn off defenses, turrets, and even the security measures of the Gene Seed vaults, opening even the gate to reach them. A battle ensued, where all other men but Leonid and Captain Eshara died, but in the end they managed to kill Nicene, but it was already too late. The Obliterator virus that had invaded the body of Adept Caesarin was now invading every system in the Citadel. Electrical discharges started around the room as every system got corrupted. The sparks and lightning of the systems soon turning into a roaring inferno of green fire as the two fled the Mechanicus Central Command node. Now the shields were down, and from the Vox, Eshara learned that the enemy was attacking again, and this time there was no way to stop it. The two remaining titans of Legio Mortis advanced on the Citadel, followed by the Vindicator tanks and 42 maddened and screaming dreadnoughts of the Iron Warriors. 6,000 red-clad soldiers followed them, as the hundreds of Iron Warriors still alive awaited deployment on the shoulder of the titans as they advanced. At this point, the ascension to demonhood of the Warsmith had started, and he was flying around with black incorporeal wings in his Terminator armor. Fighting spread everywhere as the Iron Warriors deployed on the walls and the towers left standing of the inner citadel, slaughtering everyone as they advanced, forcing the defenders to slowly retreat, defending every piece of ground with flesh and bone until it could no longer be defended. Explosions, flames, a constant roar of bolter fire and missiles engulfed everything, as the battle engulfed the entirety of the citadel. At this point they were pushed back into a corner, the entrance to the underground bunkers and cavern containing the Gene Seed vaults. The last 30 remaining Imperial fists formed a semicircle in front of the entrance, and Captain Eshara gave his last command to Leonid as the battle still enraged on the surface. The traitors can't take the Gene Seed, they had to destroy it in any way possible, no matter the method. The two shared a warrior embrace, before Leonid and the rest of his men with him went down and started destroying the Gene Seed. Outside and in the citadel the battle still enraged, the two remaining warhounds laying down a wall of heavy fire to support the Jurans as much as possible. It is here that Forix will die, as he felled one of the warhounds, the Jure Divino. The wall behind where the Titan had fallen collapsed, revealing the other warhound, his weapons squared on Forix. The turbo lasers and the Vulcan mega bolters of the last warhound turned him into red mist, with Onsu relishing in the scene. Now all that was left between them and the Gene Seed was the last 30 Space Marines of the Imperial Fist 3rd Company, with Captain Eshara facing off against the Warsmith himself.
The Warsmith faced Eshara and Onsu grinned as he saw the effect his presence had upon the Space Marine. As the captain's face twisted in sudden pain, the Warsmith leapt forward, his mighty axe sweeping down to cleave Eshara in two. Eshara crossed his swords above his head, blocking the blow, the impact driving him to his knees. He grunted and spun low, slashing a blade across the Warsmith's flank. Black blood gutted from the wound. The Warsmith smashed his fist against Eshara's chest, cracking his breastplate open. As Eshara fell, the Imperial fists charged, the name of Rogel Dawn on their lips. Gunfire erupted from the Iron Warriors, cutting them down as battle was joined, but it was an unequal struggle. And though the Imperial fists fought hard, the outcome was never in doubt.
With the Imperial Fist slaughtered, the Warsmith and the rest of the Iron Warriors rushed down into the cavern system, where Leonid and his men were destroying the Gene Seed as fast as possible. But it was a vain endeavor. There were thousands of containers, and not enough men or ammo to destroy them all. The Iron Warriors reached them, killing some of the men to stop them from destroying the Gene Seed. With his mission completed, the Warsmith started swelling with chaotic powers, and he ascended to demonhood inside the caverns. The Iron Warriors had won. Leonid and the other human survivors collapsed when they even tried to charge against the Warsmith, being taken as prisoners and slaves of the Iron Warriors. Hydra Cordatus was now in the hands of the Warsmith and Onsu himself, with Kroger dead, Larana gone, and Forix blasted to mist. As the Gene Seed was transported back from the caverns and into the ships of the Iron Warriors, the Warsmith will promote Onsu as the new Warsmith of the Grand Company, as he disappeared into the warp, now a fully fledged Chaos Demon. The Iron Warriors at that point, their mission accomplished, retreated from Hydra Cordatus for good, leaving it a deserted wasteland of death. But for one survivor, Julius Oak, the guardsman still trapped in the mountains, the last survivor on the entire planet, and now effectively alone. A Mechanicus vessel would arrive above Hydra Cordatus not long after, investigating the site to understand what had happened and why the distress signal was sent out. But all the Mechanicus would do will be to send down a team to destroy all evidence of the involvement of their order in this mess. They blasted the now empty cavern systems where the Gene Seed was kept with melta charges, and then blasted the entirety of the remains of the Citadel to atoms with orbital bombardment. Oak tried being rescued by them, but he didn't reach the Mechanicus shuttle in time. At that point, he resigned himself to being trapped in this wasteland, and simply collapsed to the ground. He would later be rescued by the Imperial Fist reinforcements reaching the planet, but finding only a deserted wasteland of dust, no signs of the battle nor of their brothers. He would survive. In fact, he was the only survivor of the entire Hydra Cordatus endeavor, and would even appear in the Book of Forges on Mars. Losing the third company was a heavy blow for the Imperial Fists, and with permission of Darnat Lysander, Thor Garadon would become the new captain of the third company and start to rebuild it into a fighting force not long after the events of Hydra Cordatus. The gene seed stolen will go mainly to Abaddon the Despoiler to create an army of Chaos Marines before the 13th Black Crusade, but some will stay with Onsu, and he would use it to create the Damonculabas in the Book of Dead Sky Black Sun. We explained that story in the Female Space Marines video, it doesn't need rehashing. But I have a big problem with the book in which the events we covered in this video are explained, which is Storm of Iron by Graham McNeill. This book doesn't make any sense for anything that happened after the attack on the Jericho Falls Spaceport, and I will explain you extremely in detail why. Now, I hope you don't interpret my more serious tone in this part of the video as rage. It is not rage, the book is good, go and read it because the story is pretty interesting. And there is many conflicts of personality happening in both sides of the war. We Italians always sound angry, Pio is an anomaly, he always sounds bored. My entire demeanor after the invasion of the spaceport is of pure incredulity, because after the spaceport is conquered, the story stops making sense altogether. For one simple reason, the IQ of the Imperial defenders drops from a normal human to around the level of a chair, and a stupid chair at that. Now, don't think I'm saying the Imperials should have won this war. Even if the story made sense all the way through the book, I still think the Imperium would have lost this one. But things would have gone in a much different direction, because you have to realize that the good writing for the Imperium ends after the attack on the spaceport. Think about the situation. The attack on the spaceport was the only moment where the Iron Warriors genuinely outsmarted the Imperial defenders. They were in orbit using Chaos Magic to hide themselves from sensors. Onsu and his men were on the ground from 3 months spying on the Juran Dragoons at the spaceport. They set down targeting beacons for the torpedo silos so that they would be destroyed immediately by the fleet when the attack started, so that the fleet was not blown to pieces by them. Then an attack from outside the walls and a rain of drop pods after bombing the defenses and aircrafts of the spaceport to pieces. All genuine, all good. The Iron Warriors acted like Iron Warriors. The Imperium acted like the Imperium. After that, removing a couple of situations that are explainable by the infiltration and betrayal of Nicene, every single thing that made the situation of the Imperial Defenders wars was 100% their own fucking doing. Let's start from the obvious with the info we have now. The planet is the only other secret gene seed deposit other than Terra. It is a deserted wasteland with a spaceport, a mountain fortress, and the Citadel. The spaceport is not voice shielded at all. The bombardments and drop pods rained on the ground immediately because they had no voice shield generators to speak of. Nor Tor Christo had any. It is why the guns of the Iron Warriors turned the walls to rubble so quickly. Only the Citadel was partially voice shielded, with an unreliable voice shield because the Archmagos was literally mentally collapsing by the strain of centuries connected to all systems of the Citadel. So, 3 main points of interest, only one is voice shielded and not even reliably. On a planet that stores enough gene seed to create, and I quote, entire legions of space marines. Budget cuts? Who knows? Now let's talk about the defenders. The defenders of such a planet consisted of 900 various patterns of tanks and transport, no super heavies like Baneblades, Shadow Swords and such, around 20 to 30,000 Imperial Guardsmen, a demi-legio of Titans of Legio Ignatum, so not even a full legio, 0 Skitari, 0 armies of battle servitors, and especially 0 fucking space marines deployed constantly on the planet for defense. Now, in the book, we're given the excuse that the Mechanicus were trying to keep the world uninteresting and pretty much not raise attention to it, which they fucking failed when they deployed on it a demi-legio of Titans, including 3 warlords. Titan legios don't guard random settlements on planets composed by rock and dust unless they are important, so the excuse already doesn't work. The events in the book, to be honest, are comical. Now, Graham McNeill is one of the original and probably one of the oldest 40k writers of all time, but what the fuck, man? You needed to make the Imperium stupid in everything it did just to make the Iron Warriors superior? And you can start seeing this by the first attack against the Iron Warriors trench line guided by the Princeps Fierak and Michael Leonid. First thing, this is a siege. Why the fuck are you leaving the walls to attack? The entire plan was waiting for reinforcements, defend the walls. Attacking outside in the hope of breaking the siege was wishful thinking at best, dumb at worst. Now, the excuse in the story is that they wanted to engage the enemy titans. The guardsman Hawk had warned them off, before they were in range with the Citadel and the walls of Tor Christo. Which, alright, might make sense. And then Princess Fierak literally goes, fuck the Juran Dragoons, I saw this Irae, I want to kill it. The charge turns into a slaughter. 2 warlords and several other titans fall. The rest retreat in disarray as the advancing soldiers are mowed down in the thousands and entire tank battalions destroyed. After that, the events of the Fall of Tor Christo. Now, the collapse of the tunnel filled with the fleeing guardsmen was an act on Nicene, so technically it is still the fault of a traitor influencing the Archmagos to give wrong orders. But the self-destruct sequence failed first because Major Tedeschi spent too much fucking time in the command room drinking one last time before going actively in the reactor room. And once there, got delayed for a full minute by the adept being given an order, directly by Nicene, to not open the door. Order that he ignored when he saw Forrix forcing his way through an elevator shaft to reach them. They literally needed a few seconds more and they would have blown up Tor Christo, which they would have had if they went directly there. The Major could drink inside the reactor room. His delay made the Iron Warriors conquer the mountain fortress. So, first we have a Princeps ignoring orders and laid down plans and leaving thousands to die for his own ego. Then we have an officer delaying a crucial operation just to take a drink, which made him fail in the last task he had. And would you believe me if I told you that things only get worse from here? Let's jump directly at the final stand, when the Citadel is being assaulted after the destruction of Dies Irae and the infection of the Obliterator virus in the systems of the Citadel. Removing that the entire third company of the Imperial Fist pretty much were as useful as a wet towel in the entirety of the defense efforts. They seemed to die constantly, the defenses held maybe a few days more with them at the maximum. And removing the assault on the trenches, every single other counter-offensive move they tried miserably failed, usually with heavy losses on their side. As all the enemies are assaulting the Citadel and the last Imperials are cornered at the entrance of the Jinseed bunkers, the Imperial Fist decide to buy time for Leonid and his men to go down and destroy the Jinseed by staying behind and keeping the enemies at bay as long as possible. The master defenders of the chapters of Space Marines decide that the best way to delay the enemy and buy as much time as possible is by forming a semicircle around the entrance of the bunker in the open without any cover whatsoever, waiting for the enemy to arrive. And what is the result after Captain Eshara gets cast down? They get blasted to pieces because these dickheads decided that the best way to buy time for the men to destroy the Jinseed was staying in the open while you are faced by Chaos Marines, tanks, Dreadnoughts, and even 2 Chaos Titans. Cover? Never heard of it. The delay action of making the enemy kill you faster than normal so he can advance quicker. And I especially have a problem with the ending. Remember one thing, Captain Eshara said that avoiding detection in orbit for their battle barge was pretty easy actually. And he never said the battle barge left. Why are humans running around smashing tanks of Jinseed when the battle barge can apply orbital bombardment directly on the Citadel and reduce it to dust? Yes, it will destroy the Jinseed, defenders, attackers, and probably itself once it is spotted. But it is a small price to pay to not let Chaos acquire enough untainted Jinseed to create entire legions of Chaos Marines. And we find out in the book that this fortress was actually built by the Iron Warriors themselves millennia ago. So this fortress was built by them. You know how long the defense lasted before everybody died? Less than a month. By direct comparison, the war for Vrax lasted over a decade. Almost 2 in fact. Fuck, Hades Hive during the Second War for Armageddon, commanded by Yarrick, with no Space Marine support and with an entire Hive city to defend, held out for months and months against the Orcs. And the Orcs were employing the same tactics of the Iron Warriors on Hydra Cordatus, if not even worse ones, as Ghazghkull actively used Weird Boys to attack the city with psychic attacks, trying to make the defenders go crazy, and they still held out more than the entirety of the defenses of Hydra Cordatus. And the stupidity of every defender on this goddamn planet that was made stupider on purpose by Graham McNeill to make the Iron Warriors seem actually better at their job can be summed up by the events of Guardsman Julius Oak. And the main thing I told you to keep in mind for this part of the video, those fucking pills everybody was taking. Now, again, the siege lasted almost a month. Julius Oak had enough pills for 6 days. After that, he lived without them. And not only noticed that he didn't die of blood poisoning from the air, again, it was around for weeks after he had finished them, but he noticed that without them his health was improving. Let me give you a direct citation to what he said. He eaten and drank only sparingly, and his food and water supplies were still holding out. But he had long since run out of the tox pills. However, worries that he would fall prey to the toxic atmosphere of Hydra Cordatus appeared to be unfounded. His health, aside from a few braces and scrapes, was better than it had been since he'd ended up on this useless planet. After the initial pain and stiffness had left his underused muscles, he had felt clearer and fitter than ever. The constant headaches had vanished like morning mist, and the ashen taste that always caught in the back of his mouth had also disappeared. His skin was taking on a healthy glow, his natural paleness replaced by the beginning of a tan. Remember, from the book we learned that those pills were in reality fucking poison. So this guy finishes them, goes weeks without them, not only without dying, but actively feeling better and better, more than he felt at any moment from when he arrived on Hydra Cordatus. Now, you will think a person with half a brain will go,
maybe those pills were actively making my health worse?
but no, to throw once more in your face how stupidly written the Imperials in this book are, at the end of the story, when he's the last man alive on the planet, and he's alone scavenging for resources, food, water, and anything he can use to survive, after weeks and weeks not taking one of those pills, the moment he finds some in his scavenging, he starts taking them again! Pio, reenactment, please!
Oh, I feel so much better without those pills. Better than ever. Oh look, more pills. Nom.
Why? I can't for the life of me tell you how irritated I was with everything I was reading. The way Graham McNeill made the Iron Warrior smart was by making everybody else dumber than a fucking Pio. It's fucking unbelievable. Now let's do the Lexicanum Light section. Even if this is such a dumb book, they still managed to get stuff wrong. First thing, Hydra Cordatus is not a Forge World. It is not designated a Forge World. It does not resemble a Forge World. It is never called a Forge World in the book. And it is confirmed to be a secret base and laboratory facility for the Gene Seed of Loyalist chapters. Their main point was to keep it a secret. You can't keep a Forge World a secret. Second thing, it is not only Imperial Fist Gene Seed that is inside, it is generally Gene Seed, including Imperial Fist Gene Seed. The list of forces is actually missing a couple of things, the main one being the Titans of Legio Mortis, as there wasn't just Dies Irae on the planet, there were several Chaos Titans. The lore of the Fall of Tor Christo is actually wrong. Tor Christo fell, there was no stopping that, especially when the idiot of Tedeschi decided at the last moment to make the plasma reactor blow up. The events of the Torpedo were days and days after, and the Torpedo was launched because of the fact that the Iron Warriors had taken Tor Christo, not to stop them from doing so. They were using their artillery and bombing the Citadel from its walls. Oh yeah, the page of Julius Oak exists, but it's completely empty. It also, for some fucking reason, places the events of the first assault on the Iron Warrior trenches at the end of the war, when the Iron Warriors were assaulting the Citadel, when by that point not only the majority of the Titans were destroyed, but Princess Fierak was already dead. I wonder if the guy who wrote this page even read the book. It also says that Leonid and his men were killed in the attack when the Iron Warriors reached the Gene Vaults. Not true. Some died, but the rest were taken prisoner and as slaves and hauled off, including Leonid himself. And that the Warsmith consumed the Gene Seed of Captain Eshara to ascend to demonhood. He did that when he killed him at the entrance of the vault, but what made him ascend was the Gene Seed inside the vault. He arrived, started to eat it, which was a symbolical gesture, pretty much a mission accomplished message for the Chaos Gods, and only then, having done what he promised, he was granted the powers to ascend to demonhood. This book was exhausting. It was not badly written or a bad read. It still managed to be interesting until the end. But why the fuck was every Imperial so fucking stupid beginning to end? To the point that the main reason the Iron Warriors won at all was the Imperials shooting themselves in the foot over and over.
The Imperial Fist truly were shafted in this book. Completely useless. And even they were idiots at the end.
Blame Graham McNeill for that.
Alright, now it's late. I'll go to sleep, so I can record my cookie show tomorrow.
I left a gift in the basement for you.
I suffered less brutalities in a Nicaraguan prison.